Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Cutting Room, the show where we talk to the experts of content marketing and edit content live. I'm your host, Tommy Walker, and I am so excited to have you here tonight. I'd like to introduce my guest tonight. We have Braveen Kumar. We are going to talk about his process, philosophy, and pregame before we get in. Braveen was one of the earliest content marketers over at Shopify, and he is now the product-led content marketing lead at Superside. Super exciting stuff that's happening over there. And let's just get straight into it. Braveen, you're on the screen right now. Tell me a little bit about what's going on over at Superside, what you're doing over there, and then we'll just take it from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tommy. So I guess like a little intro about me. Oh, thanks for having me, Tommy. So I guess, sorry, I think I jumped the gun there and like just like.
No. Go ahead. We're live, folks. So.
So yeah, a little bit about me. Been a content marketer for the last almost 8 years. I am currently at Superside, where I joined as a content marketing lead in September last year. So I haven't been here for too long, but I joined to focus on sort of like the bottom of funnel area of content marketing. So anything that is any content that we create like around the product to create demand for the product, customer storytelling, stuff that sort of like fits or maps neatly into that sort of like lead to customer, and then like after someone becomes a customer, how do we get them to use more of the product successfully. And before that, I was at Shopify for 5.5 years, where I was on the core content marketing team, which was focused on let's call them like the aspirational entrepreneur or like small business. So not Shopify Plus, which is more, I guess, like traditional like B2B. We have like a sales team, a more expensive like pricing plan. Got to request a demo to see the pricing. I was on the core team where it was more like self-serve. So really, it was kind of this weird mix between like consumer and business audiences, where a lot of the times I was casting like a wide net with my content, but also, well, the way I put it, trying to turn the C's into B's. So it's like some weird in between like B2C and B2B. That makes sense.
Yes, it does. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into the first question here, which I love this. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy behind content marketing, and specifically, you've been talking a lot lately about product-led content marketing, which we haven't talked about on the show yet. I would love to learn a little bit more about that and your philosophy behind it.
Yeah, so I think some useful context before I get into my philosophy is that I spent like the vast majority of my career as an individual contributor. So I was like very much hands-on with the execution. It's usually like my name sitting at the top of like the articles I would produce. I also like, managed the podcast for Shopify, did a lot of editing, obviously, worked with freelancers, but for the majority of my career, I was very much this like in-house writer, which I don't think, like most content marketers don't spend that much time in this type of role. They typically move on to sort of this editorial manager type of role, or people management, managing an entire content team. And so, doing this for like several years really made me realize, what's the difference between me as an in-house creator and a freelance writer? And for me, the biggest difference is I'm like embedded in the context. I am like a sponge. I'm absorbing as much as I can. Talking to customers to do the interviews, to write these pieces, talking to internal experts to learn about certain topics, so I can cover them. But more than anything, getting familiar with the product. So I would work on, like at Shopify, I would work on product launches. I would work on product education. I would use the product myself. And so like that approach has led me to basically prioritize like what I guess is being called like product-led content marketing now, but starting from the product itself and then working outwards. So not in the typical way where it's like our product does this specific thing. Like Shopify is like good for like online stores. Okay, so it's like let's write like SEO-led content, trying to target keywords related to like starting an online store. It's like you can do the same, you can go after the same opportunity, but an SEO-led approach and a product-led approach will result in vastly different types of content. And for me, a product-led piece will be first and foremost relevant to your existing audience of customers and prospects. And then you make it relevant to like the wider audience. So then you optimize it for search. And I've actually found throughout my time at Shopify, just throughout my career, is that you can do product-led content that ranks. Because when you take a product-led approach, it's really born out of your unique context, and that allows you to create original content that, Google loves original content versus the sort of like incremental approach that you typically see in SEO-led content, where it's like, this person does like 10 tips, I want to do 11, right? With a product-led approach, it's like,
Right.
well, our product is clearly solving a specific problem, and none of our problems are unique, right? If a feature exists, it's because a bunch of people have that problem, and it's like solving for that problem. So when you look at that solution and acknowledge the fact that it's not unique, you can then think about, well, okay, what education can I create around that specific feature or benefit or solution? And then you take it a step up, and it's like, how can I create something that helps our customers get more value out of that or take advantage of that solution? And then take it a level higher. And it's like, okay, how can I optimize this or how can I write this to include education or like angle it in a way that appeals to like potentially like newer audiences that may not be aware of our solution, but that have this problem. And then a level higher where it's like, how can I optimize it for search? And so for me, it's like, that's how you create content that has utility. And that is, I guess, the core of my philosophy, which is like make stuff that matters. That's not just like putting all your eggs in one basket. It's like you try to get the most mileage as you can out of it. And then you're just not like cranking out individual pieces of content. You're producing stuff that feels like assets. That'll be relevant, next week, next year, as long as you maintain them and distribute them.
What I think is interesting, because, and if I'm understanding some of this correctly, and I know that this was part of the approach that I took when I was on the Plus blog, editing the Plus blog and sort of starting that up, is that part of my philosophy anyways, and I think you touched on this a little bit as well, is that the content, you're really more of a conduit if you're talking to a lot of people within the company and within your customer base and all of this. You become a conduit for the content that needs to be created, right? And if you're really getting centralized and focused on the product, then you can have those conversations intelligently, both with your product team and with the customer side, right? Tell me a little bit more about how that sort of the feedback loops within the company are informing how your content is created.
Yeah, so I guess the best way to put it is like you'll know you've gotten there when you could basically act as sort of like a customer success rep or customer support rep. So when I was at Shopify, I'd actually like field questions from merchants because I knew the product well enough. I would use it myself. I would help other people launch their stores. And so if someone had a question, I could like jump in and be like, oh, this is how you would maybe like, this is how you solve for that. Here's like an app that you could use. Here's, like a Shopify theme, or here's how you would like, I don't know, like change the fonts within your store. And having the ability to like navigate those types of conversations actually helped me, one, engage with customers in a more direct way outside of like an interview context. And two, it helped me apply that insight to my creativity as a content marketer. So in terms of feedback loops, it would be like these conversations I would have with customers, or in like the context of Superside, it's like, sure, I have like these interviews, but then also like talk to the customer success team a lot and have regular calls and absorb those insights. And also I think dog fooding the product is very important for taking this approach. Because there's things that you'll notice when you're using it. So we're talking about feedback loops. in my own experience, I would look at what I'm doing with the product as I'm trying to like bring my own ideas to life. I would observe how other people are using the product to bring their ideas to life, and I'd internalize that, and then incorporate that into like content ideas that I would come up with and develop, and then execute in a way where it could serve our customer audience, but also new audiences. And so I think a good example of that is actually I did a piece on like coming soon pages, which is again like one feature of Shopify. Like you can create a coming soon page in Shopify before you're ready to launch your store. And then so I created a blog piece that served that around that feature with some education to help merchants, like new merchants, take advantage of that feature, with the hypothesis that that would get them to stay on the platform until they are ready to launch their stores, because they would realize that there's like this in-between state between building and launching through a coming soon page, and I could like position the article in that way. And then optimizing it for keywords related to coming soon page. And it's like, even if you Google, I think coming soon pages will still show up in like the top, I don't know, whatever, few results. And it actually helped the conversion rate, improve the conversion rate, versus like the SEO-led approach would just be creating examples, whatever, because in this piece I actually built a coming soon page using Shopify to show what I was talking about.
Yep.
And so, the feedback loops there are like, in terms of like the insights internally, talking to customers, using the product and watching myself and listening to myself use the product. And then when I put it out into the world, obviously seeing, like monitoring rankings around the piece, but also just like, what's the conversion rate? Was I able to get something a bit stronger than what I might have gotten if I took like an SEO-led approach? Comments, any kind of feedback I get around it. Actually, my favorite thing is when I look at traffic and the distribution of traffic sources, if it looks like a rainbow in traffic reports, that's when I know I've done it right, because it's not just search, right? It's actually being used in like onboarding, or like by like customer support, or like by like whatever, right? And it's like, in terms of feedback loops, that's when I know I've done a product-led piece successfully, is when I see the distribution of traffic sources, when I see some variety there, plus like it tends to have like a stronger conversion rate compared to like other pieces that may be like SEO-led.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about, so you had some crazy results in the second half of 2020. If I was reading the stuff correctly on the blog, or on your blog, it was like over 1,700 new customers from just a small handful of pieces, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how all of this sort of like went into like everything you're talking about right now. How did that play into creating so many new customers from such a small amount of pieces?
Yeah. So when I was at Shopify, big focus of my, you can call it like my beat, was customer acquisition, like new customer acquisition. And so I noticed that we never really covered print on demand, which is actually like a very popular use case for Shopify. And so the fact that that was kind of like this like white space, and it's like, oh, this is like a very mature blog, probably like written about everything, blah, blah, blah. But it's like that being something that we just like didn't touch on. And again, taking this product-led approach, was looking at my own usage of the product, where it's just like, I didn't really get into dropshipping, like traditional dropshipping, because I like to bring my own creative spin to things, and it just felt weird to just like resell a product. And so print on demand was this like second entry point that appeals to, I'd say, like more creative types, or people that want to get into like the merch game, or like whatever. And so knowing that, it was just like through observation, just being able to like see tons of these types of stores come up, plus looking in the app store, how popular some of these apps were, how many other companies basically grew to like a certain size, like, and became like very successful because they were selling like a print on demand solution into Shopify, like through Shopify, through the app store. piggybacking off of Shopify's customer base. And I was like, well, if this is something that's already happening, I can probably extrapolate that and be like, there's like a much larger slice of the market that we could be going after if we did it more intentionally. And so wrote sort of this like pillar piece and like what is print on demand, and then a complement piece that was just like a roundup of print on demand companies or services. And so one execution of that idea, if it was SEO led, would basically focus on, it wouldn't even acknowledge Shopify. It would just like go out into the market and be like, well, then what are the competitors? How do I round them out, round them up into this one piece to help people comparison shop? So it'd be like, probably like competitors would be featured in that. So it'd be like Threadless or like, whatever. That's like nothing to do with Shopify because they don't have an app. The approach that I took was, hey, we have a bunch of apps. Let me just refer to those as like print-on-demand companies and then curate those and help people comparison shop within those. And I was like, okay, if I do this, then it has something that's, again, product-led, where it's focused on existing customers and it's only showcasing apps. So like every single piece, every single mention within that roundup was basically a Shopify app. And like without exception. And so I would actually link to the App Store listing versus through like to the website. And so it created like a nice conversion path from like either like a new audience lands on the blog piece and then converts to starting a free trial, or a prospective or existing customer clicks through the app listing and then installs the app and then tries it out. And so taking that type of approach, I did it for that piece, and I did it for like a separate piece on product sourcing apps, or sorry, on product sourcing in general. But again, it was like more like an app roundup, rounding up product sourcing apps. And again, to make it easier for people that wanted to start a business but didn't have a product to sell to start to use Shopify in a low risk way. And so again, building out those two pieces, both of them like rank for their target terms, and the long tail print on demand companies or services has a lot of buying intent. And so that funnels into this piece. And because of the way it was executed, was able to convert that intent pretty effectively. Versus again, the SEO led execution, which might have been just less intentional,
right,
about the outcome.
Well, and you get some built-in distribution there as well, right?
Yeah.
You get in touch with the different app companies, say, hey, we featured you, and then they're all like, yay, and then you've got that. Now, I want to encourage anybody to, because we have kind of an intimate group here tonight, I would love to encourage everybody here to ask any questions along the way. And this one in particular is something that is very interesting to me, because I know that we have some startups in the house. Braveen, you were at Shopify before Shopify was Shopify, right? Like before it was this big brand that everybody knew. And what a lot of people don't realize is how much content was like really a cornerstone into the culture of the company. I know when I was there, I was completely blown away by how front and center it was, and almost by default, we weren't doing much paid advertising in the very beginning because it wanted to be like super stealthy. How would you say that the strategy played the content strategy played a role in Shopify's growth? And then part two of that question is, how are you applying those learnings over to what you're doing at Superside?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I really liked about working at Shopify, which I think is like, it's not an easy context to create for an organization, is we were very like, we didn't rely a lot on freelancers in the beginning. We had like a full team of like in-house creators, and each person was basically like tasked with, like we had like other responsibilities, but it was basically like come up with your own ideas, write them into being in your own way, and you have like a 1 week like time scale for that, right? And so like every week you just be like doing these like sprints, right? Like a little bit of like runway. And I think that does something to you as like an individual creator when you're not like, oh, I gotta like crank out like 3 pieces within a week, and like you're just like scrambling. It's like you almost like, like it's an entrepreneurship company, and basically the level of ownership that you took over that cycle,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think most companies approach it that way, and I think that's actually what allowed Shopify to become, yeah, pretty much. You just like dropped in and just like executed. But you kind of need people that are like very resourceful, entrepreneurial, and it's like here's a topic that I think matters a lot. Um, Ideally, you give some guidance. I think having a coach actually would help a lot with this type of environment, but being able to be like dropped in and just in the beginning, I wrote stuff that I was just like, I think my first article was about procrastination because as I
Yeah.
was telling you this earlier, but I was like, when I joined Shopify, I didn't buy or sell anything online. I was pretty much like, I didn't even know what Shopify was, to be honest, when I joined. I was just like, oh, cool, like an e-commerce software. I didn't
What
really
is
even, like, again,
e-commerce?
yeah,
Let me
didn't
write
buy
that
anything online.
article.
Yeah. And I was like, like I buy something today and I get it like in 2 weeks. I don't know if I can like really trust that. I was like that skeptical about the whole e-commerce
Right.
thing because I was like that like not familiar with it. And so like the first article I wrote was about procrastination because like that's the only thing I knew anything about. And then over time, as I was saying, do more pieces and explore topics that I wasn't like. I was just like constantly push myself outside of my comfort zone because that's what I felt like our audience needed me to do. But having that space to do that like weekly cadence of writing and shipping content, but also like editing things in parallel or like working on like the podcast, like other things.
Yeah.
But having that weekly cadence really grows you as an individual contributor because you're like interviewing internal experts. Um, you're like spending a lot of time with the topic and basically just trying to understand it as well as you can, and you end up actually like I would get my hands dirty. A lot of the times. Like I would just like do the thing that I'm supposed to be covering. Um, if not fully, at least to the extent where like I can like kind of understand it. I have like some like firsthand experience that I can like bring into my writing. And so the way I described it is like, you have internal experts a lot of the times. They have the curse of knowledge, right? So if they wrote something, they might like miss a lot of the stuff that like beginners would care about. But it's like as a beginner, I have the gift of ignorance, where now I can
Right.
like ask all my dumb questions and get all their smart answers, and then I can internalize that, and then I mix that in with like a little bit of like my own curiosity, just like really like digging into like whatever I'm doing and like trying it out for myself, um, and I'm able to produce a piece that now has original examples because of the sort of like firsthand experience that I've gained by getting my hands dirty, but also
Mm-hmm.
original insights from these internal experts that I can now like weave into the piece. And there's like different approach to this. There's like the typical approach where you just like quote people within the piece. Um, the approach that I've always taken is like I'll like write it, like I'll just like write it
Yeah.
as like myself, and then I'll give the person credit, like a co-credit or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because it is like very much like some people look like in some cases I'll give the credit away entirely if I think that person like it's like 100% like their brain. I'll be like, okay, here you go. It's also
Right.
like a nice way to thank them. But in that sort of like mixed approach, it's like because I think it's nice to hear it from like one person and like one voice versus like here's me being like the conduit and then here's some quotes that are just gonna like intersperse that I
Right.
just sent out an email blast to source and then like I'm just like working them in. It's like here's this sort of like interview that I've done and like I've like combined again their curse of knowledge with my gift of ignorance, and it's just like
And you have a strong flow that goes through the piece when you're kind of massaging their words to go along with it, right? Like
yeah,
you have this, it's a cohesiveness. And one of the things that I think is great about your work in particular is that ability to just draw somebody from the top of the page down to the bottom. Now, I will admit, in the roles that I've taken since Shopify, I've had to compete against some of your pieces, and it frustrates the heck out of me every single time because they're so good. I'm putting a link to your portfolio in the chat here, just so everybody can take a look at this, and I'll be sending it out in the replay afterwards. And to answer your question, Patrick, yes, complete ownerships and freedom over at Shopify. What a lot of people don't realize about this company is that I don't think I ever saw like top-down brand guidelines or anything like that, and it was almost by design that Craig Miller was talking about this on Twitter not too long ago. How the investment in the company was in the culture and everything else, and then they trust the people that they hire to do the thing that they do best. And from my experience running the Plus blog, and from what I know about the stuff that you guys were doing on that side of the house too, is that it's your experience combined with the culture inside the company is what made the voice of the company.
Yeah.
Right?
I think people really cared about entrepreneurship, and like my dad's an entrepreneur, a small business owner, has an auto shop. And so seeing what that did for him, like that opportunity, was kind of like my motivation, because like he didn't do any like education beyond high school. He's just a mechanic, and then he opened an auto shop when he immigrated here. And so seeing his journey and like what he was able to do, and like he's like very much like an unemployable guy, and like bringing that into the work and like being motivated by that, where it's just like you got like really into it. Like I was like motivated to use the product like outside of like work hours. I was motivated to like help out merchants in my spare time. I was like motivated to do like all these things. And like the byproduct of that was just like growth and learning, and just like developing as like into like more than just a writer, getting my hands dirty with like different things. And so to your point, it was never like top down. It was almost just like this just like this like enthusiasm for like what the company was trying to create and achieve, because any other company in Shopify's shoes would go up market, and just be like, I don't care about the little guy, right? Shopify made the weird decision to go both ways. It went up market and it went down market. So as it went for like the Shopify Plus crowd, it also went down to like I'm not even thinking about starting a business. How do I get these people? And so I always found that interesting, because it's like getting the little guy in until they become like the big guy, and being with them like every step of the way. So,
and the phrase that they would use is pre-commerce, right? Talk about people who were in that aspirational stage. And I remember when we were at Plus, like it was a struggle, because Shopify as a company didn't want to go up market, and it was Lauren who really like pushed for it, and like we had this whole proving ground type thing that we had to do, because they were ready to shut us down at any given point in time, just because they wanted to stay focused on the small business owner. Okay, so we are coming at the 5:28 mark, which I want to get into the rest of the questions first. But so really quickly here, I want to talk a little bit about your process and your pregame. What's your process for researching an article? And then right before you sit down to write, what's that look like? And then we'll jump into the edit.
For the process, a lot of it is like ongoing. Like to my point, like a lot of my research is ongoing, just like trying to learn as much as I can about the context, the customer, the product, and internalizing that. And then when it comes to like developing an idea, that's I guess when like the like formal process starts, where I think through, okay, like what's the idea first of all? Why or who's it for? Like specifically beyond buyer personas, right? Like I try to like get a sense of the very specific audience that this is for, and then like a secondary audience if there is one. And like if you read like Stephen King's On Writing, he has this concept of like an ideal reader, and so it's basically that, right? Like I really try to imagine who that individual is, or two individuals, if there's two audiences, primary and secondary, and then I think about like, hey, why us? Like why should we be the ones to create this or produce this, right? When I have those two variables, then I get into like typical like content idea development. So I'll start with distribution, right? What's the best way for me to reach, these two people that I have like thought up in my head? What's the best way to reach these people? And I get very specific with the channels and the tactics. So it's like, I like always on distribution. And I think most people over-index on SEO because that's always on distribution. But there's so many other forms of always on distribution that don't get talked about, just because like maybe the traffic potential is not there or whatever, but it's like, it's not earned like SEO is, right? it's not like a gamble. It's like for sure paid and
Hold
owned.
up.
Yep.
Hold up. If people aren't talking about it, talk about it for a second.
Yep. Sorry,
The stuff people aren't talking about, the distribution channels that aren't SEO. Talk about that. The always on.
So I think like paid is one if you do it properly. Like if you have like a nice like front end creative, I think paid can be effective. Retargeting, knowing that like difference between like prospecting and retargeting as like two mechanisms that you can use. Then there's obviously like the built-in like distribution, but that's like a one-off. I prefer again like always on. So it's like onboarding is another one. Onboarding emails. I think in product is another one. I have like one piece that's like linked to within the Shopify admin and just got like a ton of traffic. And again, it's like one of those like app roundups, like as a product sourcing app roundup. And again, that's like it's in that add a product screen where it's like you can either add a product or you can like find a product to sell. And so it gives you like two options. So in product is another one that's always on. Sales and customer success. And so there's a bunch more, but like it depends on the context. And that's why I think it's harder to talk about is because it varies from context to context and from business to business, depending on the model, depending on what the deal size is, if you were to close a customer, what the lifetime value would be, like all of those are factors as well. When you're thinking about like something like paid, for example, right? And so so just being able to like maintain all those variables in your head by learning your context when you're thinking about distribution and planning for it, and getting like very like nuanced.
Something that's interesting about this, while we're waiting for Braveen to hop back on here, is that with the always on, and I want to cover this in probably the follow-up email here, and I would love to get somebody's opinion on this as well if you've got this experience in the chat. Nope, can't hear you. Is that there is always this political question of how are you going to get yourself inside this stuff with these teams? This isn't something that will be in the scope of the conversation right now. I can hear you now, which is great.
Okay.
But it's something that I would love to follow up on afterwards, Braveen. If you can kind of give me some quick thoughts, we'll send it out in the email afterwards in the follow-up, because there is that whole political side of the conversation, which is an insanely complex topic all on its own.
There's like a whole thing around the optics of output versus like taking a more deliberate approach where you're creating these assets. Has a longer time scale inherently, requires a little bit more planning, but has a longer shelf life. It's not just like you're putting something out and it's like dead in the water, like after like that spike of traffic that you get from that initial email that you send out. It has that longevity to it. And I think the hard part is like building out models that let you, models for that execution that let you do it again and again for like related topics. So that model that I did for that app roundup for print on demand companies, I used for like another piece, right? Much more work went into the first one. A lot less went into the second one because I did a lot of the thinking up front, right? And so I think that's typically how you navigate it. People will let you do it once and take your time, but then you increase your speed over time, and then it just feels like normal content. And if you do it right, it's close to the product, has a better chance of ranking because you're probably creating a lot of other pages and whatnot relevant to the product. And so you naturally build up that relevance, I think, across the company.
I like that you're referring to it as a model and not a template. That's something that I hate when people use the word template. It bothers me.
Template implies
it's a semantics thing on my part, but
no, I agree with you. Like template implies that you just like copy paste and then like replace. Versus models just like I'm gonna borrow, like it has like this like framework, and I can just like I have to like rethink certain parts, but I know what the skeleton kind of looks like.
Yeah, cool. Let's jump into the edit. There's so many more things that we could talk about right now. I'm fascinated by all of this, but we got to jump into the edit.
I'm a little long-winded with my answer sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So what I like about this, by the way, and I'm going to drop it in the chat here, folks, but this is a piece by Andrew Lolk over at Savvy Revenue. And what's great about this piece is that we're talking about a framework, right? It's actually a perfect transition from what we've been talking about to what we're talking about now, because this piece in particular is Google Ads audit framework for e-commerce. So, Braveen, you've had a chance to skim this. If you want to share your screen, would love to get your feedback as we're going along here.
Yeah, sure.
So, first thing that you do, right? You're
First
looking
thing
at
I
a
do.
piece, you're going to edit a piece. First thing you do, what's up?
So first thing I do is, so my whole thing is people don't like reading. Like I fully acknowledge that as a writer. I even, when I'm writing, I'll have like a little post-it note that says no one cares under my monitor when I'm writing to remind myself of that. And so I'll read it like that, like with the utmost apathy. And so I'll just like scroll through, do like a quick read. That like initial like, is this worth my time read?
Yeah.
Right? So I'll like scroll down, I'll read the subheads. I'll catch anything that's like bolded. I'll be like, what's going on here? This is a lot. Yeah, take a look at like the outline here, get a sense of like how the flow is. And I'll scroll back up, I'll look at the headline, because like the headline is usually the thing I write last, but it's the thing I like to think about as I like work through the piece. And so, space on 100 plus audits in 2021. Okay, so this connecting the intro to the headline I think is super important. And so one thing, and I can see how this is connected, is it starts with that like our. So it's like our Google Ads audit framework, and then it's like we do audits a lot. We do them in one-off cases. So it's like we, our, and I'm like, that's cool. And it's like one of those things where it's like, if this is for an audience of, can I know the company?
Yeah, it's Savvy Revenue.
Savvy Revenue is an agency?
I think so.
So this would be like a good like sales enablement piece maybe, or like something that's like someone's trying to, like a prospect's trying to like figure out whether to use them or not, like what their expertise is like. And so I think it's nice to like come into it with this like demonstrating your expertise. I think that like having this in the headline might be a bit it might like lose a bit of the like, you know, that like spice. I would actually like give the framework a name. That's like my first reaction was like give the framework like a name based on like what the framework is like. And then you can kind of like brand it, right? Because you're an agency and you're trying to essentially like present your own unique approach, right? Because this is based on your experience. And so I think that would give it a little bit more like more like a unique flavor. And then within the intro, there's like this, you know, we do audits, we do a lot of audits, and it's like, okay, I get it, you do a lot of audits. It took 3 lines to make that point. And I do feel like the intro is a bit long already. And so I just like think about like, what would I cut? I would cut. Sorry, actually, so the editing process is very messy, and I always have to remind myself. I do this always, and I'm like, read the whole thing, Braveen, read the whole thing.
Right.
Because I'll get stuck in like specific things. So I'd read the whole thing. Just do a quick scan. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll do like a quick read through. I'll make like a mental note typically of stuff that I feel is like I want to flag or like just make a quick comment on. So like this GIF feels kind of weird to have here.
Can you scroll down?
Oh, can you not see this?
No.
Oh shit, sorry. I was sharing the wrong doc. Let me try that again.
While you're doing that, Braveen, I want to just say, like, one of the things that I'm constantly saying, and I will say this, I say it on Twitter, I say it to my authors, I say it to pretty much everything, is whenever you're done with your first draft, usually you end up cutting the first 300 to 500 words, right? In
Yeah.
a lot of cases, and I've seen this, I've edited hundreds of articles at this point. The first 300 to 500 words are just clearing your throat as an author, and I can tell always when an author hasn't gone through and done a second draft.
Yeah.
And it's for that reason. It's usually those first 300 to 500 words where it's just let me ramp up into this idea.
Yeah. And it's like when you're writing, it's kind of like trying to get like a lawnmower to start. But it's gonna take like a couple pulls of the cord before it like starts cutting grass. And the intro is kind of that a lot of the times. It's a lot of false starts, and you just gotta like cut those out. And honestly, like usually the intro doesn't even make it into the final when I'm editing, because like it's such an important piece of the content that and it's like the first thing that you do typically when you start to write, which usually I'll just like kill the entire thing and rewrite it.
Yep.
When I'm doing it myself. But yeah. Anyway, back to the GIF or GIF or what do you want to call it? Yeah, I would like flag stuff like this, and I would be like, I would just leave like question marks. I would do this in my head typically, but I'm gonna do it like live. I would leave question marks at anything that I'm like cause me to like stop or like just like maybe like raise an eyebrow as an editor. I would look for like structural stuff mostly. If I can read the subheads and the images and get a sense of what the value is of the piece on like a sliding scale of like 0 to 10, like where am I at when I just do that? That tells me a lot about like how much work has to be done at the structural or strategic level. And then yeah, just like go through.
Talk to me a little bit about structure as you're going through this. I'd love to hear about the structure first, but then second, and I asked this question last week of Rand Fishkin, but I'm curious to know now, are you a planner or a pantser?
When it comes to writing?
Yeah.
Pantser, 100%.
Yeah.
Although, because whenever I do an outline, it never stays that way. Because like you start doing the research and you're like, well, that's not what the audience wants to know. I actually find that like if you start with an outline, you stick with it typically, and you like follow that plan all the way through. Typically, what you end up with is going to be like not true to the topic, and so you end up like all your plans should be written in pencil almost, and you should be willing to scrap whatever you thought the piece was going to be when you start researching and writing it. Unless it's something that you know like really, really, really well, then maybe, but that's honestly like not always the case. And yeah, so just like going through. So actually, one thing that I always flag is parallelism. I think that is one of the, like if there's like one concept that I think anyone should Google and just like learn more about it, they want to become a better writer, like a cleaner writer, is just parallelism, because it applies in so many different ways. But a lot of the times it's in the sentence structure of like, or the subhead structure, and also bullet points. These are like things that are like very easy to spot, and are also typically things that writers might forget in the first draft. So here's one that comes up where it's like, this is a list of questions to ask when you start your own audit. And so these are all worded as questions, which is great. So that's great parallelism. A great example of like parallelism when you maintain it. Here's when it gets broken, where it's like, is tracking working as it should, right? And you get into like these like sub questions, but they're more like ideas than they are questions. I look at the last one, which is actually worded as a question, and it's like, okay, how do I word the rest of these as question? Because I actually feel like this works better than just the phrases. So I would reword these to come across as more like sub questions under this like larger question. Just so it's easier for the reader to scan, right? Because when you break consistency like this, it interrupts the flow for the reader, because then they have to be like, wait, so is tracking working as it should? And then it's like, Google Analytics imports. Wait, what does that mean? Right? What do you mean by that? Right? So it should be worded as a question. And so, just like make a note. I don't know if you want me to like do like direct edits.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, do, like high level. Um, High level comments. Because the line edits are what take me the most amount of time. Like that's when I gotta really be in the zone.
Right.
This kind of like high level stuff is like easier for me to do. Um,
On the subject of line edits, how long does
Yeah.
it take you to do your own line edits? Like
Oh,
after
man.
you've written your draft, like what's that look like afterwards?
That takes me a while. Like line edits are like I'm like very slow at typically.
So with me personally, live line edits, I'm actually one of the least efficient authors or editors when it comes to a line edit
Yeah.
in that part of the process, because it can take probably it takes me up to around 30 hours to from start to finish on a piece because of how meticulous and methodical that last final draft has to be.
But yeah, to your point, like I take a long time on line edits because like a lot of writing is just like indulging possibilities. You're like coming up with as many possibilities as possible, and like where you get the most possibilities is at the line level, where you're thinking about word choice, you're thinking about like is this sentence like structured properly, and so when I get into like when I get into like that flow state, it's a lot faster, but it takes me like a bit of time to like get there. I started using this app called Centered, which is actually like really good for getting to that state. Highly recommend. It's I think I have like a Mac app and it's also for like Windows. But it basically is like the best app I've ever found for focusing, and I think like every writer should try it. Um, I can share a link after if you want, but
Yeah, please. There's a
yeah,
podcast I recommend too called Flow State. Amazing podcast,
yeah,
which really helps with that.
yeah.
Don has a question here. How long do you take to let a piece rest between writing and editing?
A day at least. I'll also like change the font if I need to make it look different. I'm not gonna lie to you,
Interesting.
like when I was at Shopify, I would edit in the CMS a lot, which is like not a good practice. But like in a different CMS, it's like a different editor, and like then I'd catch
Yep.
things that maybe I didn't catch the first time around or whatever. Um, but I think having like a hard, basically like a time scale that you commit to, and it's just like how you divvy up your time, can be like whatever, but you try to like adhere to that. And if that means that like even after you've had the your draft edited and you're like putting it to the CMS, you're still like polishing it and refining it, that's fine. I don't think editing ever actually stops.
No.
Because like you're still like optimizing after the fact, you're updating stats, whatever. Um, how do you know when you're done editing? Actually, Tommy, that's a good question for you.
Uh, you don't. You don't. I was actually just having this conversation with someone not too long ago, with Aaron Ordendorf actually, and it's kind of like the ship of Theseus, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, if by the time a year from now that article is completely different, is it the same article that it was when you started? And yeah, the editorial process I don't think ever ends or should ever end. I think it's always important to revisit a piece probably every 6 months, at minimum, because your research might change, your market conditions might change, like
Yeah.
new stuff might have been discovered, and
Yeah.
that gets more into like the workflow elements of things, like, and how do you build that into your process.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you're able to build it into your process and you have team structures around this, every 6 months to a year, maybe a year might be pushing it out just a little too far, but I think
Yeah.
that's what's important.
My biggest pet peeve as an editor is like, or not pet peeve, but just like something that I see a lot of is bolding being used unintentionally.
Mm,
I think what I try to do, again, on the topic of like parallelism, is I'll try to like reword things so like the bolding is symmetrical. So like I'll reword an entire bullet list so that the first phrase can be bolded and it's like consistent all the way through. Stuff like this I find a little bit distracting. And I don't think it's necessary, right? So it's like spend an hour just looking around and taking notes, right? Review the fundamentals, segment the account, use filters. And this is random one where it's like don't chase the rabbit. Um, and so what I would do is actually just like, oops, sorry, turn off suggestions. Um, Try to keep the sentences tight and try to keep the bolding consistent throughout to create a more enjoyable reader experience, because inconsistencies again disrupt the reader's momentum. And I think as an editor, like the number one thing you have to prioritize is that momentum, and maintaining that like throughout the entire piece. So like, yeah, even like here, it's just like, it's so much easier to scan too, for readers who are in a hurry. And so that's another thing that I try to look for, or opportunities to bold things within bullet points. If they're not bolded, if there's any way that I can like maybe surface that value at a glance, because you're editing for two audiences, skimmers and like actual readers. And the vast majority are going to be skimmers, for being honest, especially for like a piece like this that's a bit longer. And so, yeah, here's another example of what I'm talking about with that bolding. I think phrases like this that independently don't communicate a lot of value, how can we reword this to make it communicate more value at a glance? And then how can we structure this so that it has that consistency throughout, right? So like these are all questions, and then this is not a question, this is something, this is a question. It's like structured weirdly. Like, how do I maintain that structure consistently throughout? Because again, it's just like easier for the reader to like navigate the piece. So I look for like opportunities like that. And once I've had a chance to like familiarize myself with the structure of the piece, there's like obvious stuff like at the end of the intro for like a longer piece like this, you'd want to have a table of contents. Yep. And so, you know, like getting that in here, but then doing it in a way where the table of contents communicates the value of the piece at a glance. This is stuff that I feel like is like table stakes at this point. And so I find typically people construct the table of contents based on the subheads alone. I like to add a little bit of like extra value to like sell each section. So like right when someone lands, you have them before they scroll or before they leave.
Yep.
The table of contents right at the top is your chance to like keep that person here on this page.
And yeah, so, Tracy Wallace and I were talking about that in her episode, where it's almost like a trailer, right, or a preview of what the post is going to be about, so people can decide early on, or at least just skip to the part where
that's relevant to them.
Yeah,
exactly. And so if there's like something that I can like reframe or reposition as like a template, or like there's like examples, or there's like here's like a checklist or like whatever, right? Just like make it more practical and like really call out that pragmatic value, right? Or like, you know, here's like something that's going to feel more like a tool than text. I'll call that out in the table of contents, because that's what people want when they want to like jump to like a specific section. So like, for example, this is about a very specific framework. I would want some kind of like call out that lets me, or like the table of contents, to be structured in a way where like it's easy for me to like navigate to that framework, and it's sold to me. It's almost like positioned to me in a way that has me, you know, ready to just skip down to that if I just like want to see that first, and I can like scroll up and like see the rest down the road. Because like, I don't know about you, but like when I consume content on the internet, it's like in a very non-linear way. I don't know if that's just me or if that's like most people. I think it's most people. But yeah, I rarely like read from the first line down. I usually like choose my own adventure and jump around a lot, because I'm looking for like a specific thing that I was promised before the click, and yeah, to make it easy. And so a GIF like this I would cut just because like it doesn't feel like it adds a lot. And I would also, something like this I would actually turn into like a pull quote.
Yep.
Because I want this to stand out, and because there's no images in this section. And yeah, so as I'm going through, I like flag like these types of things, because to our point earlier about like line edits being a lot of time and concentration, it's like I try to like edit in this mind space where like I am being very nonlinear about it. I am just bouncing around. I'm not like being very methodical about it, and I'm just like flagging things as I flag it. And then once I'm done that, then I'll go in and do the line edits where I need to be in the zone. I'll like, you know, get into like that center app that I mentioned, which like plays like nice, you know, flow state music. And it'll tell you if you're like on Slack or like Twitter. It'll be like, you seem to be getting distracted. I don't think
I love that.
Yeah, it's like a coach. And it's very annoying when you're like doing research that involves you like being on Twitter or Slack, but outside of that, it's pretty good. And so, go through and like flag stuff like this, leave a note saying, just like very quick. A lot of these are like notes to myself, and then I'll polish it as notes for the writer after. Because a lot of times when I'm editing, I'll edit my own edits. I'll try things, see how they work. And like reject my own edits and then like try something else. A lot of it is going to be like trial and error. If there's a chance to like reframe things as like a listicle within the article, I'll do that, or like a checklist. If there's a chance to like design something within the piece, if there's like a stat or something, like a quote, that could be like a block quote, or like something like this where it's like, don't get lost, take notes. I would almost want to like, like if I could have like visual examples of this sort of like audit process in action, I would want to call those out. But that's stuff that happens like early on, like before the writing even starts, where it's like, we want to like pull out specific examples of our editing process. We can like maybe like blur out any sensitive information, but to be a little bit more transparent with like real examples of the 100 that are supposedly like being fed into this framework. I think it'd be good to just like call out very specific examples throughout of what this might look like. It might be a good way to like. Yep.
What if you don't have design resources available to you?
I'm not going to do the plug, but you can do like the.
No. Please go ahead. That's what I'm. I set you up for it.
So you can use an outsourced design service like Superside. That's more like a for a subscription fee. It's kind of like whatever types of designs you want to get produced for a piece, whether it's like a blog header, data visualization, or what have you. An approach like this works well if you want to take like a mixed approach between like templates and custom graphics that are inline. And I think more and more this is going to be more important. You talked about having like Rand on SparkToro did this like really good piece around link sharing on social media platforms. And so more and more it's like, I almost don't even care about getting the click when it comes to distribution on social. It's more just like, how do I create conversations? And so you want to like produce these sorts of graphics for distribution or for inline that you can use for distribution or repurpose for distribution. So you can have that distribution engine set up for when you're producing content to make it easier to do this kind of stuff. Because like typically content marketers are like, they invest a lot in writing, which is like obviously like very important, the research, the writing, like all that stuff, but don't have anything in place for distribution and specifically for design, because most distribution is only accessed through design. You want to get backlinks through a piece of content, chances are you're going to need some kind of visualization inline for people to like link to and embed on their site. To do that, you need design. Blog header, you need design. You don't want to have like a blog header that's like optimized for social, design. You don't want to use like stock photos. You want to have something that you can like pull out, like a quote or something, and then promote that on social, design. And it's like, to have some kind of like design system in place that lets you do that, I think is super important going forward. And I think it's almost like that iceberg where the tip of your content marketing investment you can maybe realize, but what's hidden under the surface is going to be through all the other aspects of creation, from like video to like data visualization to like whatever else, figuring out how that plugs into your overall content marketing strategy, and just like setting yourself up to execute that. Do like both like a templated approach and this sort of like custom approach that you can like tailor to each piece.
And you're building in these mechanisms that people like. You've talked a lot about distribution, building in the distribution, and thinking about distribution early on in the process. And from what it sounds like, you're also thinking about the broader ecosystem of which this piece is going to be existing in and what it will be competing against, which I think is really important to the overall creation process. We are at time, Braveen, we could do this for 2 hours. I would love to like go into this even further with you. We'll do a part 2 at some point maybe. We are at time, folks. So thank you so much, Braveen, for coming on.
The invite.
Yeah. it has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you being with us today. Next week, we are taking the week off, but after that, we will be having guests like Kaylee Moore. Brian Clark is coming on very soon here, and we have a number of really good guests lined up for the future. So if you are interested in learning about future episodes, I will send a link out in the follow-up, and you can sign up for the email list as well as getting replays of previous episodes. So thank you so much, Braveen. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending live, and have a wonderful rest of the night.